There's a growing percentage of the population who has a deep and grave concern about the possibility of the United States government turning its military and all of its might against the civilian population. In this video, we're going to look at not necessarily the possibility of that type of event happening, but of the likely outcome. Who wins? The military or the citizen? So we're going to look at quite a few numbers ranging from city, local, state governments all the way up to the federal government as well. And we're going to look at statistics about firearms, as well as two historical examples of that we need to bear in mind as it directly relates to this message. So I'm looking forward to your thoughts and your comments down below so we can continue to master our craft and develop our tactical virtue. So let's start off just looking at some basic numbers, right? So the military has about 2 million total service members, and we'll assume for the course of this discussion, which is absolutely would not happen, but just assume that all 2 million of them, and that accounts for about 1.3 million active duty and about 700,000 reserves, assume that each and every single one fell in lockstep with this drive of turning on its civilian population, whether it was through, acts of war or whether it was just enacting martial law. How much can they get done? So we have 2 million there. And then if you look at the rest of the federal government, you have about 2 more million, and that's between all of the branches from DOD, civilian guys, to Homeland Security, Justice, State Department, all these guys. Now we know that a lot of these civilian dudes couldn't actually be the one out enforcing, but these are the guys that are supporting in so many ways, especially those 950,000 civilian DOD employees, right? And then out at the state and local level, you have about 18 million. So all total, you have roughly 25 million on the high side. Local, state, law enforcement, and then federal agencies as well, right? So about 25 million folks. And it kind of help put this into perspective of what that means and doesn't mean. We operate in the military with a golden rule of 3-to-1. And that means for your planning purposes, whether it's offense or defense, you need to account for 3 of you against 1 of them, right? If you're on the defense and you have 3 dudes sitting in it and there's 1 guy that comes up, you're okay, right? To maybe assume some risk there. But if 2 comes up, that's no bueno, right? So that 3-to-1 ratio is a tried and proven method for the most part. I'm going to show you where it hasn't always worked in those 2 historical studies, but that is a good platform to be planning and operating from, right? So how much could 25 million reasonably take on in their planning purposes if they wanted to engage in some sort of activity? Well, you do the math, it'd be about 75 million, right? How big is the United States population? 330 million. Take off those 25, you get 305. Not quite big enough. So let's dial it down, right? Let's just say it's not the entire United States. It's just, some of the larger cities that are out there. So take it, for example, New York City has a huge police department, right, with 34,000 cops for a population of 8.6 million. It is the largest standing police department in the country. And that gives you a ratio of about 1 to 252. So 1 cop can police 252. So that tells you something, right? If you have a civilian population who is compliant and wants the laws that are being worked on to be enforced, not saying that they're enforced in New York, at least not at the DA level, but 1 cop can do it, right? 1 cop can police 252. In other portions of the country, it goes all the way down to 460 in places like Houston, like 1 to 460, and LA, who also all have, large police forces. So that tells you something, right? if the civilian population is compliant, and I think most people generally are, like, they want cops to go out there and do the right thing. But what happens if cops and the military were doing the wrong thing? What if they were turning on the citizen? Like, that 1 to 250 would not work, right? Firearms, a good case in point in the conversation is to remember that in the United States there are more firearms than there are people. I think there's like 100 people to 120 firearms. There's over 400 million firearms in this country. Over 400 million. So even up here in the great state of Washington, there's still quite a bit, even though all these laws are going whack. So 2 historical examples, and then we'll come back to these numbers. In Afghanistan, at the height of it in 2010, you had a total U.S. force of about 100,000 operating against about 36,000 known in the Taliban. And if you include, we don't know the numbers for all the population that may have been aiding and abetting these dudes, but there you have 100 to 36. So that kind of closely matches the 3-to-1 ratio, right? Kind of closely matches the 3-to-1 ratio. And how did almost 20 years in Afghanistan work out for us? Not too good. Certainly the end wasn't all that well. In Vietnam, 1968, at the height of the war, we had 536,000 boots on the ground. 536,000 troopers on the ground, right? And we were operating against NVA at the time of about 128,000. So again, you have about 3-to-1 odds in there. And yet again, at the end of the day, it didn't turn out too well. There was not an overwhelming victory. If you look at, and that's why, it was fun to kind of poke fun at Russia for kind of getting their ass kicked in Ukraine, the way that they have been, or at least the way that we're being told that they're getting their butt kicked, because the Russian force is pretty large and the Ukrainian is not. That would be comparable to the United States invading Canada as far as military might and power and reach and infrastructure. Imagine if we went into Canada and got our asses handed to us. Yeah, we'd be the laughingstock of the world. But that's exactly what's happening over in Ukraine with Russia. Not to argue one way or another against that particular engagement. But, we have this idea, and some people at the highest echelons have it. Why do you need an AR if I have an F-15? Well, history has proven to us that boots on the ground with it from a determined force wins. Dang near all the time. A determined force wins. Even against the Goliath, right? That little David wins. So what does this mean for us? 1, do we need to be concerned about this kind of a threat? If it got to that kind of a level, you're probably talking more of a repeat of a civil war, because all of those folks are not just going to, blindly turn against the citizen, because you're talking about them, going against, their brothers and sisters and their friends and their family in wherever they're at. You also have a good portion of, the other side of the aisle that wouldn't tolerate it. They wouldn't put up with it. So you can imagine how much of a threat that there would have to be for these types of orders to be seen as lawful and for people to get around them. Now, is there a small percentage of folks from NGOs and even within that are pushing for something like that? Probably so. I don't put it past it, because there are some really dark, dangerous, evil, and twisted people who are gunning for more and more power and control. We certainly see it at echelons way below, where we're talking about. But I have no doubt that there are folks who are working for this kind of thing to happen. But again, even if it did, do they stand a chance? And the answer at the end of the day is no, if the people of the United States of America are determined. If you go down like Germany and just be compliant, well, then the answer is yes, they can overcome the population. That's why we have to stay strong, we have to stay resolved, and be grounded in what we live and move and find our being in. Team, again, I'm looking forward to your thoughts and your comments down below as we continue to master our craft and develop our tactical virtue. As always, until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.
Team, if you want to master your craft and develop your tactical virtue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on future content. Consider becoming a channel member. It's going to give you exclusive access to content not available to anybody else. I appreciate you guys. Until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.